Greetings, unshaven cavemen. I am Patrick Smith. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I am here today with my partner in victimless crime, Kaysen. Welcome, Kaysen. Tell me, Kaysen, do you remember back when companies just wanted to sell you things and didn't want to like teach moral lessons and virtue signal all the time?
Yes. Those were the days.
That time, those days are dead. Those days are gone. Today, we're going to talk about the video that is presently, as we speak, going viral from Gillette. Gillette's The Best Men Can Be campaign. Check this out. From today on, we pledge to actively challenge the stereotypes and expectations of what it means to be a man everywhere you see Gillette. In the ads we run, the images we publish to social media, the words we choose, and so much more. And so they've given us a video that sort of reflects on Gillette's past, as well as comments on the present.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
So we lead off with bullying, the Me Too movement, and toxic masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it? We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too
Sexual harassment is taking over.
long. We can't laugh it off.
SJW's fully successful complete attack on comedy itself.
Who's the daddy?
Notice the astoundingly stark whiteness of the audience. Notice the mostly white board of directors condescending to the woman.
Actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
How interesting that the target of this video seems to be this concept, this saying that we've heard forever called boys will be boys. That's the problem here, is that we say boys will be boys. Boys will wrestle with each other. That's a boy thing to do. That's something that boys enjoy doing. But there's also this other nefarious stuff that boys enjoy doing. You know, like raping and abusing and molesting and harassing and all this stuff. Boys will be boys. That's the problem. If you have a problem with the phrase boys will be boys, that means that you have a problem with boys being boys. That's kind of another way of saying that the problem is just boys existing. To tell boys that they shouldn't be boys is very harmful and very self-destructive for boys. And more on that later.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual...
And I would be completely remiss if I didn't point out in a video decrying the evils of bullying that the video features Anna, "Get off the stage, you fat fuck Kasparian," from the Armenian genocide-denying Young Turks. Just wanted to point that out there.
So here's a question as a former newsman. Let's look at third column over, first row. It says 24 breaking news. It's 7:01 a.m., but they're teasing the 11 o'clock story. So, based on that, I conjecture that this is not, in fact, a true news story. Further evidence would be, see that lady? Second row, all the way over, right above your head, in the red overcoat there, red blazer, whatever you call those fashion people. And see the guy? Well, watch this. There they are again. They're right behind my head. Look at them. Right? He's even wearing the same blazer. He's wearing the same blazer. I think she just changed her shell on the outside of it.
This lady looks a lot like that lady as well.
Right here, maybe even the same shirt, but you can see it's kind of an off-white color. Maybe they just didn't white balance the camera the same way to make it look a little bit different. So here's my question. If it's such a big deal, why can't they get actual journalists talking about actual stories rather than building their own media around it? It's such a big problem that we had to pay someone to pretend to talk about it.
How hard could it be to find a journalist saying the words men sexual harassment allegations? You hear that all the time.
And there will be no going back. Because we We believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Smile, sweetie. Come on.
Smile, sweetie. And then the ever-elusive Black White Knight rides in to save the poor defenseless woman from being asked to smile for the camera. How dare he? How awesome that we have a Black White Knight riding in to save her helpless ass.
To say the right thing. To act the right way.
Bro, not cool, not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men, we're everywhere.
and small.
So men need to say the right things and act the right way. How is it that we're supposed to act, and what are we supposed to say?
And small.
We're supposed to tell girls and women that they are strong, not boys.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, okay? Okay.
And this is also interesting. So you often hear women talking about how they have to be scared. They have to be much more cautious when they're out at public or out at night when they're walking alone because they're more susceptible to attack than men. They say this is male privilege and, female victimhood. It should also be pointed out in a situation like this that men have to be very conscious when they're out in public interacting with children, especially children that are not their own, because they will almost instantly and almost always be assumed to be some pervert interacting with children.
So I remember I was at a Dave & Buster's just playing arcade games and having a meal. I was on a business trip, and there was a game that I was playing, and right next to it was this big old stuffed animal vending claw game. It comes down and grabs the thing. And I was like, I'll try and win something for my wife and surprise her whenever I come back home. So I go in and I start playing it, and this little, I don't know, younger than 5-year-old girl who's very hyper comes up and she's like, oh, look at all the cool things. They're so pretty. And I'm like, yeah, they are. They're real pretty. Where's your parents? That's the first question I ask because, I don't want to be, mistook to have some kind of nefarious plot going on. Right. But then I go on and I win a thing, and it's like a little penguin, and it's really adorable. And she goes, oh, it's so beautiful. And I'm like, you know what? You can have it, because I wanted to make her day. And she's like, oh, it's amazing. So she comes over, and she just slams her body into a hug around me. And she's like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Like that kid out of Despicable Me.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
It's weird because I have two...
Yeah, I was just saying, you got to be careful with that.
Yeah, I was of two minds about it, because one, I was like, oh, this is great. She's having a great time and all this stuff. But on the other hand, I was like, oh, man, this is not a good look for a rando guy who's just hanging out in an arcade to be being hugged by this little girl. So I was like, all right, it's time to go. Have a nice day. And I thought, man, what a society that I live in where I have to think about that. Let's talk about, if we're talking about personal experiences, there's one for you.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when I saw this portion of the video is that man just went over there and manhandled a bunch of children. What are the people around going to be saying? It's kind of a sticky situation.
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
Oh my god, this is so transphobic. They should have ended this video with, because the boys of today will become the women of tomorrow. The best a MAAM can get. I just love it when corporations lecture me about things that I don't do. I want to point out that toxic masculinity is not a thing. It's just not. It's a euphemism. It's a label for a group of attributes that some misinterest has labeled all men with. And so to talk about it like it's a problem for all men is sexist. Or, so either it's like genetic and built in which case it really isn't any man's fault if they behave this way, or it's learned behavior, in which case you kind of have to think about blaming the people that have most of the responsibility and most of the contact with young boys and young men, raising them and teaching them in school. Who's the vast majority of, which sex is in the vast majority of people raising boys? Which sex is the vast majority of teachers teaching boys in school, teaching them how to behave, teaching them everything they know? So if toxic masculinity is learned behavior, who are they learning it from? Just a thought. So I just want to say thanks for this razor ad. This commercial really soothed my savage urge to rape women and harass them. How about you just shut up and sell some soap? The next thing that we can talk about is what they really mean by toxic masculinity. They really mean traditional masculinity, which means men, for thousands of years, the behaviors that they evolutionarily were programmed into having. Kaysen, can you tell us the definition of traditional or toxic masculinity, please?
Toxic masculinity, according to the Good Men Project, defines it as a narrow and repressive description of manhood. Specifically, manhood defined by violence, sex, and status, and aggression. Which, you know, that's not how I float my boat as a man, but what do I know? I just have, you know, an X and a Y chromosome, you know, it's just whatever.
Yeah, so if that's learned behavior, whose fault is that? Who taught us that behavior? But if it's genetic, if it's nature-based behavior, which kind of makes more sense because the people going out and hunting lions and fighting in wars and, you know, sacrificing their lives and dying for the safety of the women and children back at the house probably shouldn't be too empathetic, and they probably shouldn't be too sensitive. They should probably be really competitive and really aggressive, right? So maybe that's where that comes from. But what happens when you take a species, an entire sex of a species, and demonize built-in traits? What happens when you take these inbuilt concepts and pathologize them, and then take these terms like toxic or traditional masculinity, and then give this like cultural feedback loop that starts with the SJWs, works its way through the colleges, and then eventually outputs itself into science and scientists? Well, you get this kind of perversion from the American Psychological Association, where they issues their first ever guidelines for practice with men and boys, where they say things like, first, clinicians must be aware of dominant masculine ideals and cognizant of their own potential biases. Second, they must recognize the integrated nature of masculinity and how factors ranging from spirituality to ability status to age and ethnicity interact. Mental health professionals must also understand how power, privilege, and sexism work both by conferring benefits to men and trapping them in narrow roles. They should consider how stoicism and reluctance to admit vulnerability hamstring men in personal relationships, and they should combat these forces in part by encouraging fathers to engage more fully with their children. The last part of that, fully agree with. Would love to see more fathers engage with their children. But when you hear these terms, power, privilege, sexism, this is cultural Marxism. In an article on the American Psychological Association's website, you have cultural Marxism that originated with the SJWs, filtered through the culture, and has now come full circle and is being broadcast from a objective truth science site. Well, I've got another example of this kind of thing happening. Let's say a couple hundred years ago. Let's say that there is this new mental illness that was diagnosed and described by a doctor, a physician, in fact, that was published in a scientific journal called Drapetomania, a mental illness that was described in and published in an actual medical journal that supposedly tells us why slaves would ever want to flee their masters. Yes, this is real science, folks. This is what happens when the cultural meme of the day gets output from the factual, authoritative podium of science. Here's a little paragraph from an actual medical journal from 1850. If the white man attempts to oppose the deity's will by trying to make the Negro anything else than the submissive knee-bender, which the Almighty declared he should be, by trying to raise him to a level with himself, or by putting himself on an equality with the Negro, or if he abuses the power which God has given him over his fellow man by being cruel to him, or punishing him in anger, or by neglecting to protect him from the wanton abuses of his fellow servants and all others, or by denying him the usual comforts and necessaries of life, the Negro will run away. But if he keeps him in the position that we learn from the Scriptures he was intended to occupy, that is, the position of submission, and if his master or overseer be kind and gracious in his hearing towards him without condescension, and at the same time ministers to his physical wants and protects him from abuses, the Negro is spellbound and cannot run away. So in a way, you could compare the ethos, you could compare the meme, the cultural meme of religion to this new cultural meme that we have today from the far left, So you have the far right cultural meme of religion using science to make excuses for why the cause of a slave wanting to run away from slavery is a mental illness. And today we now have science telling us why built-in traits of men are toxic and a problem and need to be eradicated. This is kind of the entire flow of the thought process I had today. And it's so dangerous. When you tell men that their built-in selves, who they are, is toxic, is bad, is wrong, is the enemy, is the problem that has to be defeated, you turn men into like these listless, self-destructive beings. And the last thing you want, trust me, in society, is a bunch of ragey men that hate themselves. Where do you think they're going to project that? Well, you get it in suicide. Like now you have vast quantities more men killing themselves than women. That's when they project it internally. And I would attribute that being the fault of this new culture, this new meme that we have, making men hate themselves, hate their own existence, think that they are the problem and the bad guy with the world. And then when you have them projected outwards, it's going to get really dangerous. And I don't say that as a threat. I say that as like a warning. When you make people hate themselves, bad things come of that. So that was kind of the point of this video today. It pisses me off. I'm not buying any more Gillette stuff. I didn't really use Gillette stuff. I'm kind of a Dollar Shave Club kind of guy. Link in the description. But did you have any thoughts on that, Kaysen, before we go?
Yeah, I think it's really telling that people will take whatever beliefs they have, whatever conclusion they have, and they will convert the evidence in whatever way they see fit to make that worldview work for them. They'll either ignore certain evidence or conjecture certain evidence that never existed. Like in the case of the 1850s, it's like, well, if he ran away, you were being a bad master. No. If he ran away, he was asserting his right to self-ownership. You were an evil person for trying to control another human being. Nowadays, if you don't believe today that men have privilege and that they don't have this toxic masculinity, then you're part of the problem, bucko. You should look in the mirror, you disgusting, filthy animal. And it's like, well, no. Show me an evidence of this toxic masculinity. Show me an evidence of this privilege that people supposedly have. What's interesting is in the the American Psychological Association website, it said it's important to know that men, you need to understand how privilege works with men and simultaneously hampers them from certain choices and fits them into narrow roles. That's quite a contradiction to have within the space of a few words within the same sentence. I find that quite interesting.
And these bad behaviors from men that men do, you shouldn't talk about it like that. There are bad behaviors that some individuals do, and there's of both sexes. When a woman is boorish and obnoxious, that's bad. When a man is boorish and obnoxious, that's bad. When you apply these attributes to an entire collective label, you lose the plot. You stop actually speaking sense, and you start speaking Marxism, is what I'm trying to say. And you lose the effectiveness. You can't fix a problem that isn't well defined. You can't fix a nebulous problem that affects, that supposedly, everyone is a part of. But when in reality, only a very small specific minority of individuals are a part of and cause. Just like the current jihad against modern day racism. It's unconscious bias. Everything's unconscious bias now. Well, if it's really unconscious bias, then there's really very little anybody can do about it. So it's kind of an unhelpful thing that just makes people hate themselves by default.
I would go so far as to say that the premise is self-contradictory because they say it's bad to attribute certain things to an entire group of people in the case of race or to females or to sexual orientation. But at the same time, it's not bad to attribute bad things to males as a whole. I think that is a miscarriage of any kind of social justice that may even be out there. It's a self-contradictory argument that can't stand on its own. Because if ethics are supposed to apply both ways, you can't have it to where only one side can insult the other. Because if we took this ad and spoofed it with any other group out there, it would be very bad in the mainstream media's eyes. It would be very naughty indeed.
Yeah, but see, ethics only apply to the people with power and privilege. That's how it works. It's not two-way. It's not reciprocal. And we're out.